So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and we're back on my old friend the grassy plain here for a free-for-all, and this is partly because this is one of the shorter battles I've been sent recently, so I do actually have the time today to actually squeeze it in and record it, but also because it is a free-for-all and we haven't really done a free-for-all in quite a while, and also because there's been a lot of people asking for a bit more ELVES in the comments section, and fortunately the player who sent me this battle will play ELVES, who is going to be playing as ELVES today, so we will be having a little look at how they can get on, and it is actually an all-elven affair, so which of these elven factions is going to be the strongest, albeit one of them is more of a hybrid faction because we have ELVES played by ELVES, we have Dorwinion played by Beshi, of course Dorwinion with a very large elven contingent, so they kind of count. We also have another of the high elven factions who we perhaps haven't seen as much as we did in 0.96 in Linden, played by Hazarama, and then finally we have the Wood Elves played by CPT Gervais, who's going to be Mirkwood, of course. Mirkwood, one of the elven factions, one of the two Sylvan elven factions who have been played a little bit more in 0.97 with some of the changes that have been made to make them a little bit more appealing. But we shall start off over here with ELVES, I think. And for this battle, because of the very nature of it, we will be going into the army compositions in a little bit more depth, and we will also be having a little chat throughout the battle, I think, about how each of these factions should interact with one another. So ELVES, more so than any other faction in the game, really have a really heavy emphasis on quality and getting up close and personal with the enemy. Of all the elven factions, they are the most adept in melee combat, purely because of their enormous melee defense values combined with their very good armor values as well. Most of the elves, of course, have a little bit more of an emphasis on just focusing on that melee defense, whereas in ELVES that is very much not the case. You know, with their upper tier units especially, they add the armor into the equation as well, which makes them very, very difficult to beat in melee. You know, and most factions can't really afford to go quality heavy against them because ELVES will 9 times out of 10 be able to win that battle. You have to try and pick apart ELVES in other ways. He has got some Archers of Rivendell on the front line, however, and it is worth saying as well that on the lower end of the ELVES spectrum, they actually share quite a lot in common with the other elves, especially Linden actually, both in terms of dress and function, because the Archers of Rivendell do not have a lot of armor value, especially when you do not upgrade their armor. They do have an armor upgrade available to them, of course, but as with most elven archers, they will be able to combine better damage than standard archers from other factions, as well as good accuracy and range. In this situation, however, that isn't likely to be all that of a factor, to be honest with you, because, of course, it is an all-elven affair, really, so no one is really going to have the advantage when it comes to how the elves can usually claim an advantage, which is, you know, in terms of quality and skill. And one-to-one, they can often win engagements, but that isn't necessarily going to be the case this time because everyone's playing as an elven faction, so we shall see how that works out. The Noriterno warriors back here, they start off with slightly better armor than the Archers of Rivendell just in front of them, but the main attraction for bringing the Noriterno warriors is the fact that they are a little bit stronger in melee than archers of this type normally are, and of course that combines with the fact that elves in general are usually going to be better in melee anyway. So the Noriterno warriors can technically be viewed on as a bit of a hybrid unit. They are first and foremost archers, but they can also muck in melee, pulling out an axe and a sword. So a decent all-round unit this. He has gone for a fairly high archer contingent, which in a free-for-all is not necessarily a bad thing for ELVES to do, because while in ELVES usually I think they're most at home sort of really getting up close and personal quickly with most of their army, in a free-for-all that isn't necessarily the case because you leave yourself hideously exposed from behind to be double-teamed, and then that would not be good for ELVES at all. So going for a little bit more of a cautious approach in a free-for-all is probably the way to go if you want to be successful anyway. In behind, he has got some Eldraenway archers as well, so very much going for a very missile-heavy approach, which is odd for ELVES. We'll see how well they can do, especially against the other elven factions who tend to be a little bit better in this situation, but it does look as though they're going to be trying to single out Dorwinion first and foremost, who perhaps will be a little bit more human-focused anyway. Eldraenway Swordmaster as well, and also some Gwaithir Myrdain, so this is the 2 units of infantry that he has on the field today, so this is all he has really in terms of infantry. Both of them are very, very strong, of course, especially the Gwaithir Myrdain. They're really, really good AP. That will definitely only be useful really against Dorwinion though, and their Alvelin, considering Linden and Mirkwood are much less focused on their armour. We shall see how well they can be used, but there is a reason for this, obviously. In conjunction with having a very high archer count, he also has a very high cavalry count as well, with the Gwaithir Rockdor, some of the strongest knights in the game, on station and ready to charge into the enemy. The Elder Runaway Lancers are going to be riding with them, but also the Spear Cavalry of the Imladris Sentinels and the Spear Bow Cavalry hybrids of the Riders of the Bruinen. So this is pretty much as strong an Imladris cavalry force as you're likely to see. This could be extremely devastating, and all of the other factions will do well to try and mitigate the damage that this Imladris cavalry force can do, because if they can do that, Imladris' army is relatively toothless, but if they leave themselves exposed, especially if they allow Imladris to sort of leave their cavalry for the late game, they could be in real trouble, which might be the reasoning behind him having so many archers. He is going to be going after Dorwinion from the off as well, so let's see what Beshi has brought. So some Elvelyn Vinegard and Elvelyn Infantry, of course, in comparison to the other Elven factions on display. The fact that Dorwinion can engage in having these human units to offset their elven quality as well is going to be a very interesting thing to behold. The Elvelyn Infantry and Vinegard are not going to be the best at killing other elven units especially, but they will at least make up for the numbers deficiency which the elves often have to suffer through. We have the Morroquendi pikes back here as well, obviously always good to see the pikemen, and they pretty much are going to be the main way by which Dorwinion's front line is going to keep itself together, especially against some of the armour piercing that Imladris have, and you'd imagine the quality that Linden and Merc would have as well. Morroquendi bows, the heavy elven archers of Dorwinion, the poison arrows, not likely to be breaking too many of the other elves in this battle today. Of course, the elves tend to have very good morale, but you never know. As the battle wears on, maybe those poison arrows will have a bit of an effect. Elvelyn Vinegard over here. We have the Morroquendi Glade Masters, obviously one of the strongest units of elven infantry in the game. Alongside the Mirkwood Palace Guard, they're very similar units to one another. I think the Mirkwood Palace Guard are slightly stronger, but it is very slight, and obviously when you're talking about units of this quality, it doesn't really tend to matter all that much. Some Elvelyn Marksmen, and then of course we have the Dorwinion Knights in the Morroquendi Glade Lords, a really, really strong unit of knights, very much on the same sort of level as the Gwythi Rockdor that we just saw. And he also has some Nandor Glade Riders over here as well. So the Nandor Glade Riders, of course, very much glass cannons, extremely devastating off the charge, but very limited armour values, no shield, and of course no multiple HP either, and no bonus against cavalry in melee either. Could have a few hidden units, he could have some Morroquendi Stalkers around here as well, but we shall see. Now moving on to the other High Elven faction, moving on from the Avari. We have Hazarama, who's going to be playing as Linden, of course. He's got some Harlinden Guard on the front line, the better of the Mirkwood, the Linden archers, when it comes to skirmishing. Also, those spears will come in handy to deal with a lot of the cavalry, which is going to be buzzing around on the field today, especially from Imladris, but also you would imagine that, that Dorwinion cavalry is going to be a factor in the battle as it goes along. 4 Linden archers just in behind, so obviously they do not have the shield or the spear. But that's not going to be all that important. Like I said, going a little bit more passive in a free-for-all in the early game is probably the way to go, and to do that, you are going to need a little bit more in terms of archers, and of course the elves can certainly oblige there. So the 4 Linden archers coming in just behind the shielded Harlinden Guard. I was about to call them Fountain Guard then, I need to get my words in a line. Meanwhile, Noldorin Guard in behind them, a very, very strong unit of line infantry, and considering the fact that Imladris have not gone for a lot of infantry at all, which is quite odd for them, Linden should have overall the highest quality infantry on the field if they invest in it. So the Noldorin Guard, a big part of that, a very, very strong unit, also inspiring nearby units to make them even less likely to rout. Combined with the Harlinden infantry and a very solid pipeline of 4 Linden pikes, Linden are certainly not going to be wanting in the infantry department, and as if that wasn't enough, they have also invested quite a lot in their cavalry. Harlinden riders, very similar to the Bruinen River Wards across the way, only in typical Linden fashion they trade in armour for more melee defence. That is the main difference between Imladris and Linden. Speaking of which, we also have the Horse Lords of Ulmo, who are incredibly fast, very devastating off the charge, terrible to try and deal with in melee. They aren't armoured or shielded, however, which is what the Gwythi Rockdor have over them, but the Horse Lords of Ulmo can be a real nightmare if you can't get a hold of them, because of how swift they really are. And in melee, of all the Lance Knights, they're probably the strongest because of that really high melee defence that Linden are known for, and another unit of Harlinden riders there. And then finally, we have Mirkwood, played by Captain Gervais. He has gone for certainly a bit more of a defensive formation from the off, which is to be expected considering what a free-for-all is often all about. Mirkwood, however, of all the Elven faction on display today, should have the archer advantage here. Only Lothlorien can claim to have a better archer force than Mirkwood, in my opinion. So they should be able to claim a bit of an advantage in the skirmish, especially with some of their heavy archers here with the Hiri Peng. Some hidden units over there, which you would imagine probably the Woodland Realm Patrol. He's also got the Elves of the Elven King with their Silverthorn arrows. So they're going to be able to wreak some havoc on the enemy infantry when they approach. More Hiri Peng. He could have the Wardens of Amon Lank as well, it's possible, as well as maybe even the Greenwood Rangers. but we shall see. Spears of Emendwia, Hiriek on both sides as well, so some spearmen. Elder Council spears combined with javelins, so more ranged punch, as well as some Hirialth and some Ents. And then at the back here he has some Huntsmen of Amon Lank. Not the certainly not up to the same level as the Sindar of the Girdle, but certainly nothing to be taken lightly either. I like this Mirkwood composition though. He's gone for a lot of archers, of course, which in this sort of situation is probably the way to go. And he has got a good mix of defensive infantry in the spears, as well as a good amount of punch here at the core with the Hirialth and the Ents. So it's a very well thought out army, I think, this from Mirkwood. It wouldn't have stood up too well to an Imladris rush, but that isn't going to be the case, as we've already seen in this battle. So without further ado, let's begin. Let's see which of these elven factions truly is the best, as it started off on ×6 speed there. Obviously Lothlorien not on the field today, which, you know, Lothlorien would have been a good pick, I think, in this situation, because they combine some of the qualities of Imladris when it comes to their infantry prowess, with good armour and also very good attack values as well, in particular from Lothlorien. But also, of course, their archer companies are extremely powerful, so that sort of thing would be very useful in this particular situation. So obviously in a free-for-all you can see here that people are just sort of moving around. No one is too eager to make the first move here, but someone is going to have to. In fact, I think I will actually turn it back up to ×6 speed as someone decides who is going to gather their courage first and foremost. And it looks as though it is going to be Imladris. So Imladris re-manoeuvring themselves around the back over here, presumably to prevent Mirkwood from coming in and sideswiping their entire army. But this also will allow them to get their archers into position and start trying to harass the Dorwinian position. But the Morroquendi Stalkers are immediately going to be firing into the Bruinen, the Riders of the Bruinen. I was about to call them the River Wards there. But with 2 units of Riders of the Bruinen to the Morroquendi Stalkers 1, it's definitely going to be an overwhelming force. And even 1-to-1, the Morroquendi Stalkers would do worse in a skirmish fight. Imladris, of course, much better armour than the Morroquendi. So it's not going to go too well in a skirmish fight for them. You can see already that this unit of Morroquendi Stalkers has been absolutely shredded right down the line. Not a good start here. The Morroquendi Glade Lords are going to come forward, but it's already too late to save this unit of Morroquendi Stalkers. They should have been cycled out immediately when it was clear how this was going to go. Also, a really terrible mistake here from Dorwinian right from the off, running his knights through his own stakes. Terrible mistake there. Yeah, and it's not a good start here for Dorwinian. Imladris, not only have they been able to put the pressure on, but to be honest with you, it's not really a result of good play from Imladris. This is just a result of really sloppy play from Dorwinian. And immediately the Gwaithdy Rockdor, now with a huge advantage over the Morroquendi Glade Lords in terms of numbers, they'll be able to charge in and really go to town in melee. Not good. Not good for Dorwinian. So Dorwinian already on the back foot. The Erenborn Axe Guard, or Axemen I should say, revealing themselves. But for now, you know, Imladris can really afford to dictate the pace of this battle. They can send their archers forward. They can afford to play the long game with Dorwinian now, because one of the really aggressive tools that they have in the Knights, and also one of the tools they could have used to try and harass the Lions and the Horse Archers, are now gone for Dorwinian. And Dorwinian, this is not a particularly good looking advance this either, moving in a very narrow column directly towards the very widely spread Imladris lines. Now, you could make the argument here that this is not the worst thing to do, because Imladris have got a very limited infantry corps, but this is not a particularly well organised advance this at all. So I'm not really sure what Dorwinian are hoping to accomplish by recklessly moving forward. Meanwhile, Mirkwood and Linden clearly not too keen to advance headlong into one another, although Linden may be forced to, because I think of the two, Mirkwood have definitely got the better archer force here. And Linden, you know, with all of these pikes, that's a very juicy target for the Mirkwood archers if they're able to get into position. But here you can see Dorwinian advancing into column formation, and you can see that as a result of this, Imladris able to block the entire army's advance with just a single unit. Of course, the Eldarenway Swordmasters will eventually lose this if Dorwinian continue to advance in like this. But this is absolutely horrendous play, I've got to say. It's almost comical how bad this is from Dorwinian. Like, they are essentially bottling themselves up. Like, on a map like the Grassy Plain, you have all of this space that you could use, and instead you're choosing to move forward in what is essentially a choke point like advance. Allow him, like, of course the Eldarenway Swordmasters are going to lose this fight, but that was always going to be the idea, just sort of slow the army down, let the Imladris archers do their thing. The units that are filtering through are going to get charged now by the Imladris cavalry, who are basically free to go into the back line. The Morroquendi bows getting charged immediately by the Gwaithdy Rockdor. And of course, the good thing for Imladris here is the Eldaranway Lancers also, Dorwinion getting absolutely eviscerated here, and they've got no one but themselves to blame, because this might honestly be the worst performance in a free-for-all I've ever seen, and that's saying something. I've seen people who are entirely new to the game do better than this. Entirely new to Total War as a series do better than this. But here, yeah, you can see that now Dorwinion's army is routing en masse. An absolute disaster from the Avari elves. The Imladris cavalry doing their thing, and of course this, in many ways, is a bad thing for Mirkwood and Linden, because Mirkwood and Linden are very likely to do more damage to one another than Dorwinion has been able to do to Imladris here, which gives a huge advantage to Imladris going into the late game here. Here, Imladris Sentinels and the Gwythi Rockdor finishing off the Alvelin Marksmen, Morroquendi Stalkers. In fact, this, in many ways, this smacks of the Dorwinion player kind of throwing in the towel after he ran his own knights through his stakes. I feel as though he kind of gave up, which kind of reflects rather poorly on him, to be honest with you. I would hope that's not the case, but based on how terrible this battle was from Dorwinion, I'm willing to bet that was the case. He ran his own knights through his stakes and then he thought, oh well, I've already lost, I'm going to just charge my army in a very narrow column towards the enemy and just die. The Eldaranway Swordmass as well have actually held up very well to that sort of pressure as well, so yeah. I'm very unimpressed with Dorwinion in this fight, both as a result of their just sort of lack of awareness, but also just from the fact that I think they have actually thrown in the towel early on, which is not good. Not good at all. Alvelin infantry here, defeat seems certain, of course. Going after the Archer of Rivendell. But yeah, Imladris going to have a very comfortable victory here. And you can't really say it's because Imladris as a faction are just sort of matched up well and their army composition was good here. It was purely because of Dorwinion's incompetence. But still, you can only beat what's in front of you, and Imladris have routinely dispatched a very poorly run Dorwinion outfit here. The Gwythi Rockdor charging into the Alvelin Vanguard there, very, very nicely done. And it's a shame because a widely spread out rush here could have paid dividends against Imladris, because they did not have the numbers in terms of infantry to deal with a well thought out rush. The Morroquendi Glade Masters are in and amongst the archers, and to be fair, they are racking up a decent kill count for themselves. But yeah, I mean, that's all Dorwinion can really hope for at this point. Devastation. I've never seen a Dorwinion army bent over to that extent before, and it comes down to just a very poorly thought out approach. Here you can see the Horse Swords of Ulmo. I think the Horse Swords of Ulmo and the Huntsmen of Amon Lank were coming forward to try and actually do a bit of damage to Imladris, but because of the presence of the Horse Archers and Foot Archers, that was never going to go all that well. So, let's see if we can turn our attention to a battle which is perhaps of a little bit higher quality over here, as Mirkwood take on Linden Hazrama here. These Huntsmen of Amon Lank, without multiple HP and without a shield, they are pretty easy to focus down with archers, to be honest with you. Charging in, however, they have done a pretty decent job here on the Harlinden Guard, but those spears will come out now and the Huntsmen of Amon Lank will struggle. But you can see here Linden, in a skirmish fight against Mirkwood, are going to struggle terribly. You can see just all of the death along this line. The lower armor values of Linden really coming into effect here. And at this point, Linden, I would suggest, have got no real choice other than to move forward and be the aggressor. Purely because, if they continue to just sort of sit back, the Mirkwood archers are going to be able to take even more of a toll on Linden's infantry, to the point where they may honestly surrender even that advantage to Mirkwood. See there the Hiri Peng, but also the Elves of the Elven King turning around. The Linden cavalry is in the backfield. The Horse Swords of Ulmo are running around, but again, unshielded, lightly armoured. They do have multiple HP, but you can tell they are starting to drop, and when all of these Mirkwood archers turn their attention onto the Horse Swords of Ulmo, they will start to take some pretty serious losses. They need to be careful though, because I mean, if the Horse Swords of Ulmo get a decent charge into the Ents, they could kill off a few of them, and that is a target Linden could go after, but I think certainly Mirkwood have set the tone here, and the engagement is one that Mirkwood will be more comfortable with than Linden. I think it's going to be a case of death by 1,000 cuts here. I can't really see Linden having all that good a time here. They went for a lot of archers. Of course, the Harlinden Riders are here, who, to be fair to them, are coming in, and they are doing some damage here to the Mirkwood lines. Mirkwood do need to respond to this somehow. And it's not as if Linden are completely defenceless at range against Mirkwood. It's just that Mirkwood, you would imagine, would go on to win that particular engagement. And I think from a Linden perspective, what they would probably be hoping for at this point is Imladris to go after Mirkwood, both of the High Elven factions, to catch the Sylvan Elves between them. That is probably their best hope for a positive outcome in this battle. There you can see the final Huntsman of Amon Lank being killed off there by the Harlinden Riders, but also more of the Wood Elf arrows finding their mark here into their more lightly armoured brethren from the west. Well, there goes the Bearded Elf. Pimp slapped by one of the Ents. Yeah, the 4 Linden archers have come forward yet again. And to be fair, Linden are holding their own in this skirmish fight, but I feel as though that's because Captain Gervais, he should be focusing down these individual units one by one. There is, I think, a little bit of room for improvement here with regards to how he's set up his army. Like, he hasn't really responded to these Harlinden Riders at all. He's left his line in a very static position. And I think, particularly in 0.97, the days where you can just sort of put your archers into a static position and then just shoot for the entire battle are gone. You can still do that, but you will be punished more for it in 0.97. And Mirkwood had every advantage in the skirmish department going into this battle. Unless the Linden player pops up with a unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrion now. And actually Mirkwood pulling back, showing their backs to the enemy. A few more of their elves are going to fall as a result. And yeah, you know, Linden, maybe I didn't give them enough credit. They do have the Wardens of Amon Lank, so that's what I'm surprised about. I'm surprised Mirkwood are moving back. I suppose it's because there's the presence of Imladris over here. And so in order to try and counteract the Imladris cavalry maybe coming around and giving them a few charges, he's going to try and retreat back within his stakes. But I mean, you know my opinions on people who are not too eager to get stuck in to a fight. I'm not a big fan of passive play. I don't like retreating. It seems cowardly. But I mean, I can see why Captain Gervais is moving off the front line. But again, like, every skirmish advantage should go to Mirkwood against Linden. You know, you're up against like 4 Linden archers. The likes of the Wardens of Amon Lank and the Hiri Peng will make mincemeat of them. So I'm not really sure why Mirkwood are pulling back here. Like, from a Linden perspective, all they'll be hoping for is that Mirkwood use up all of their ammunition so that their pikes and their lightly armoured infantry can get into melee without getting shredded. And Mirkwood continue to run away from Linden, which again, I'm so confused as to why that would be the case. I mean, over here you can see that Linden also taking their eye off the ball, really, allowing the Ents to get into melee with the Harlinden Riders, which is going to be terrible for them. Looks like this unit of Horse Archers is going to be scoured from the field, and there they go. Actually, no, they're not going to rout. I assume when they try to exit melee with the Ents, that would be enough to rout them off, but no. That High Elven morale keeping them in place. And still Mirkwood retreat. I mean, for me, in a free-for-all, especially if I were Imladris observing this particular situation, this would be all the motivation I would need to go after Mirkwood and not Linden. Because it's clear what Mirkwood's trying to do here. They're trying to retreat, put as much distance between the other two factions as they can, and then hope that they go after one another. And for me, if I were Imladris, that would be, again, like I said, all the motivation I would need to go after them instead. Like, you're not getting away. You will fight, whether you like it or not, would be my mindset there. You can see here that Linden, I mean, wisely is not taking the bait here. They're not charging right into Mirkwood. But I mean, now we have a bit of a Mexican standoff going on. I think we should actually turn it up to times 6 speed, because it's going to take quite a while, I think, for one of these players to seize the initiative and actually get into melee. I was wondering why this was going to be 25,000 frames with how badly Dorwinion did. Now Imladris are moving backwards. Unfortunately, it looks as though Mirkwood's tactics are going to pay off for them here, because unfortunately Linden and Imladris are going to be going after one another by the looks of things. The Noldering Guard are on the front line as well, and unfortunately this is going to be, oh dear. That's not good. Just like Dorwinion before them, the Knights of Imladris charging through the stakes, but at least the Eldarenway Lancers make it to the front line unmolested, and the Noldering Guard are going to take a charge there. The Gwythi Rockdor do manage to charge in now, but the Noldering Guard wasn't the best charge. They had to go through the stragglers of their own unit there, which mitigated a lot of the damage that could have been forthcoming. Imladris' army there, and suddenly Lyndon find themselves caught between a bit of a rock and a hard place. Elder Runway Lancers coming in. Gwythi Rockdor coming back. They need to get out of there actually though, because the advancing 4 Lyndon pikemen will be exactly what is needed to shut down this Imladris cavalry force. The Lyndon archers moving forward. What do Lyndon have back here? All of their pikes, a few of their 4 Lyndon archers as well. Harlenden Guard trying to zone out the Imladris cavalry, but with how heavily armoured Imladris are, that's unlikely to happen. Harlenden riders are there. The archers of Rivendell are going to return fire. And you can imagine that this means that the Lyndon forces are not going to last all that long. A veritable shower of arrows there. So Imladris certainly the army that... I mean, like, Lyndon and Mirkwood didn't do crippling damage to one another there. So, I mean, any advantage that Imladris could have had isn't really manifesting itself as of yet. Mirkwood and Lyndon just took bites out of one another's archer forces. So still, it is a very tense 3-way standoff. Anyone can still win this fight, and I feel as though it's the person who can avoid going into battle first the most. Mirkwood trying to swing around to the side of Imladris here, and suddenly it's Imladris the ones who are going to be feeling the pressure, because Lyndon are coming around this side, Mirkwood are coming around this side. In order to get away, they would have to go through the middle of the two of them, which obviously would be a terrible idea, with all the arrow fire and charges they would be taking all the while. I think, honestly, what Imladris could probably get away with doing here is just running their cavalry into the corner and trying to get the cavalry away, and just allowing their infantry to be enveloped. Allow the archers to shoot as much as they possibly can, let the Myrdain and the Swordmasters get as many kills as they possibly can, and then try and sweep in the late game with your cavalry to win, because I feel as though the tone for this battle has already been set. I think Lyndon and Mirkwood are quite eager to try and deal with Imladris first and foremost. Which is interesting. Possibly as a result of their overwhelming victory against Dorwinion, Lyndon and Mirkwood sort of saw the fact that if they tore lumps out of one another earlier on, they would never have been able to defeat Imladris later. Oh, excuse me. I do believe I'm getting a cold. Eerie Pang. Firing away. It's a bit of a lull in proceedings here. I think I am going to fast forward once again. Not that these battles aren't interesting in their own way, but I kind of run out of things to say about them when there's sort of long periods where they're just sort of manoeuvring around one another. That's the downside of doing a free-for-all. I would assume that's finally Dorwinion God. They must have had a unit that was sort of just hovering around in the backfield over here that was finally... Yeah, it was Aaron Vaughan Axemen that were hiding, I suppose. He was trying to win the battle with 3 hidden Axemen. I mean, points for effort, I suppose. Mirkwood are now coming forward. So Captain Gervais has an opportunity here to prove me wrong by being the first one to make a move in this situation. It always takes a decent amount of courage to be the first one to move in sort of a Mexican standoff situation like this. Riders of the Brunnen taking a lot of damage from the Mirkwood foot archers, and of course horse archers. You know, they can't really win in a skirmish fight against foot archers of particular quality, just because of the numbers situation. So Imladris, it looks as though they are going to actually try and take on Mirkwood in melee, and they're just going to try and kite back against Lyndon, and all of that Imladris cavalry is also going to cycle around here against Mirkwood. So this is good news ultimately for Lyndon, because the die has been cast. Imladris are charging into melee against Mirkwood. Their cavalry is also over here against Mirkwood. Will they charge in? Well, they're near the javelins here. They're charging into the Warns of Amon Lank and the Hiri Peng, but that's probably the worst place they could have charged, to be honest with you. Although I say that, it looks as though the charge actually did connect with some of the Ents, which is kind of unfortunate for Captain Gervais, because the Ents were coming in and I thought they would be able to sweep in against the cavalry and do a lot of damage. As it was, it looks as though they got there just in time to be on the business end of these Imladris Lancers. But now the Ents are going to come in and take a chunk out of that Imladris cavalry. The rest of the Imladris cavalry charging into the front line of Mirkwood. Here comes Lyndon. sandwiching what remains of the Imladris front line between themselves and Mirkwood. So not looking good for Imladris at the moment. Their cavalry hasn't been quite as devastating as I'm sure they hoped it would be, but it is still at least present on the field as they continue to charge into the Mirkwood skirmishers. But I would certainly say that so far, the ones who will be most pleased with this engagement should be Linden. In come the Noldorin Guard. Hirialth on the front line. Eldarenway Swordmasters fighting back to back, but against the Hirialth and the Noldorin Guard from both sides, you would imagine this probably isn't going to go too well. But Noldorin Guard getting cycle charged by the Riders of the Brunnen. The Horse Archers, though, so not as devastating as it could be, but the massive cavalry, even with a charge bonus of 1, the massive Horse Archers often means they can do decent damage off a charge. Those Knights probably should have charged into those Ents. The Ents continually taking damage from these charges. The Elder Council getting charged now. Mirkwood probably feeling the pressure a little bit at this point because all of these units are horribly exposed. They can't defend them, so the Eldarenway Lancers and the other High Elven cavalry free to just charge in and out as they see fit. Linden coming forward now as well. Like you'd imagine the Imladris infantry force will buckle under this sort of pressure, but Linden also perhaps a knife in the back to Mirkwood here as they surround both of them. It's a very interesting engagement this, as Linden are sort of surrounding this frontline engagement. Riders of the Brunnen charging in. Victory seems certain for Linden, as you would probably expect considering how this fight has gone. 4 Linden archers coming forward, the pikes, the infantry. The pikes are going to be a real issue, I think. Unless they're killed off, Linden should go on to win this, because Imladris will be reliant on stuff like their cavalry to do the business. Although I say that, I think most of the Imladris cavalry is actually dead at this point, which is bad news for Imladris. Good news for Mirkwood, though, because it means that their skirmishers can continue to fire. While in the backfield there are still some archers of Rivendell firing away. Javelins and archers finding their mark into this blob of Linden infantry, however, and they need to get moving here. They're sort of caught up, they slowed down, allowing Mirkwood to get a few more shots off. And of course, Harland infantry, as good as they are as line infantry, are going to be absolutely no match for Elders of the Elven King. Warns of Amon-Lank continuing to fire. Across comes some more Noldorin Guard. Still some Imladris cavalry charging around the field, but no longer enough, I think, to make a real difference. There's still some Gwythi Rockdor in the backfield, but they're very depleted. And if it's Linden they have to fight in the late game, as I said, pikes are going to be a real issue. What have we over here? Yep, Wards of Amon-Lank and Elves of the Elven King together, dumpstering these Linden forces that are trying to stop them from firing. But I mean, this is their job. Linden just wanted to get into the backfield here to stop the Mirkwood skirmishers having their way with the Linden front line. And the Hiri Peng have been caught up on the 4 Linden archers, although not for long, they will break. Spears of Emondwyr are routing off. There's still those archers of Rivendell in the backfield as well. So this is still anyone's game. Imladris are still putting up a real fight on the front line, mainly as a result of how strong the Eldarenway Swordmasters are. There's also still the Gwythi Myrdain, albeit they are very depleted at this point. The Imladris cavalry is on the move, going to try and finish off those Linden forces in the backfield once and for all. But there's still a lot of pikes here, a lot of 4 Linden pikes for Linden. Still these Woodland Realm Patrol running around again. Like, I'm not sure whether Merc would have got enough left in the tank to be the winners here, but they could decide the winners. Because if they do charge into the Linden front line, they could do enough damage to those pikes to allow the Imladris cavalry to win it. There goes the Imladris general. I don't know, I mean, I think Linden have just got enough of a force still here that they probably should go on to win it. Although I say that, they are still taking arrow fire, which can be like kryptonite to a Linden army. Gwythi Rockdor charging around, finishing off those Linden forces. But like I said, like, the Knights are not going to matter too much as long as Linden can keep their forces consolidated around their pikes. They still have Noldorin Guard in there as well. There goes, I believe, was that the Mirkwood general? How on earth did he end up dying? Very unfortunate for them, I suppose. There are some Norotino warriors that are routing off. And yeah, you can see that the Mirkwood front line is largely gone at this point. The Elder Runaway Swordmasters now having to fight head-on against the Linden pikemen. The thudding of arrows continues. Elders of the Elven King and Wardens of Amon-Lank are still alive, however. Good quality units. But I don't know, like these Mirkwood skirmishers are depleted enough at this point that they may not be able to do the damage to these Linden forces. The Imladris cavalry trying to charge in here, trying to do some damage, but like I said, you know, in a free-for-all, if you have a lot of pikes, if you can save them for the late game like this, they can often be the difference maker. Because the armies are all so depleted that the pikes can keep infantry at arm's length. There are no arrows left to really kill them. Cavalry that's been saved for the late game is obviously going to be not much use against pikes. So that could be the difference here between victory and defeat. We saw in that battle on the Anduin not so long ago, a single unit of Uruk-hai pikemen was all it took to make the difference between the two sides. And here it could be the difference that allows Linden to go on to win this fight, although still, those Mirkwood arrows finding their mark. There isn't much in the way of Imladris forces left now though, and Linden should probably spread themselves out a little bit. Because at this point, well, I say that, that would allow the Noldorin Guard to be charged by what's left of the Imladris cavalry, wherever that may be. Where have they gone? Some archers of Rivendell moving in, but they're already shaken. Linden now moving off. Has the Imladris cavalry finally been dealt with? No, they're still in the backfield over there. Not enough of them to really make too much of a difference though. In come the archers of Rivendell. But I don't know at this point. I mean, the Noldorin Guard getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves there and actually playing into Mirkwood's hands a little bit, but you would still suggest that with all these pikes, Linden should have an advantage in melee. But maybe not. Maybe with these archers of Rivendell attacking from the back, maybe Mirkwood can get those archers around to the side, and maybe Mirkwood can instead go on to win this. Is that a rout? Yes it is. I was about to say it would be very strange to try and cycle charge with archers of Rivendell. Defeat seems almost certain. I think that's probably a fair assessment from an Imladris perspective, but again, maybe not. Maybe if they allow Mirkwood to kill off most of these pikes for them, maybe that cavalry they still have left could be the difference maker. But you can see here the problem, like the 4 Linden pikes obviously in terms of a quality unit are no match for the Elves of the Elven King, but the Elves of the Elven King can't get into melee with them because the pikes are just continually pushing them back. Wardens of Amon-Lank charging into the side. The Woodland Realm Patrol still have ammunition though, which could be a massive difference maker. This is where Linden are at their weakest. One of the unit of pikes is turning around to chase the Mirkwood archers off, and Mirkwood didn't really need to get that close to Linden, to be honest with you. I'm not really sure why they did. In comes some Elder Council as well. Do they still have ammunition? A few javelins wouldn't go amiss either. How are Linden getting on now? Bouncer Forces is evenly matched. This has been, in spite of the very strange way in which the battle started, this has been a very close battle. Very competitive between any army that wasn't Dorwinian. The interplay between the three factions has been very interesting, because having a three-way battle, often it's whoever's the most cowardly will go on to win. But in this case, all of them have been suitably aggressive to the point where I wouldn't mind if any of them won, really. Elves of the Elven King victory is a distinct possibility, really showing the Noldorin Guard who's boss in melee, but again, I'm not sure whether they can close in with the pikes. They need those archers to really make a bit more of a dent in them. And the Imladris cavalry could still be the thing that makes the overall difference here. I think the Elves of the Elven King are trying to get out of melee, but honestly they would probably be better off staying in melee with the 4 Linden pikes. I think what they're trying to do is sort of not allow the Imladris cavalry to charge into them, which is understandable. But if they stayed in melee with the pikes, if they did get charged, and the Imladris cavalry would carry through into the pikemen. The Imladris cavalry trying to get a charge off there, but the 4 Linden pikes turning around to meet that challenge head on. The Elder Council are here as well. I mean, that was not a particularly good charge, and they did end up connecting with the pikes as well, so a bit of a disaster there for Imladris. The Elves of the Elven King charging in. Still, it's anyone's game, but I don't know, I mean, It's whether or not the Imladris cavalry can get some decent charges off without hitting the pikes. It's whether or not those Mirkwood skirmishers can put a big enough dent in the Four Linden pikes. And it's whether or not these pikes can just sort of hold their formation well enough to deal with a unit like the Elves of the Elven King. Is the cavalry going to charge in here to Linden? They are. But some of those pikes do turn around. Of course, the more they turn around, though, the more of an opportunity the Elves of the Elven King have to slice their way through more of the Linden pikes. They're going to charge in here to some of the exposed Noldering Guard, but that wasn't a particularly good charge again. More of them die. I think the Woodland Realm Patrol are out of ammunition now, so they're being forced to commit themselves to melee, which I think is probably the death knell for Mirkwood's chances to win this fight. And that gives Imladris only a very narrow window with which they can win it as well. They need to charge in quickly. Otherwise, it could be all over, and Linden could claim victory. Imladris being a little bit indecisive, but that's kind of to be expected considering the situation at hand. They were thinking about charging in again then, but thought better of it. Elves of the Elven King at this point, there's only 15 of them left, but I mean 15 Elves of the Elven King against disorganised pikemen would still be able to win this fight. The problem is that they're not well, balance of force is evenly matched, and that's the problem. Like, these pikes need to stay together. Trying to separate them like that could be a terrible, terrible mistake. The Imladris cavalry thinking of charging in there. And these pikes at this point are not particularly well organised. Hazrama may have just made a huge mistake by trying to move them around. And now, as disorganised as they are, that could be just the thing that the Elves of the Elven King need to kill off more of them, and they are doing so. Unfortunately for Mirkwood, though, they're not going to win this fight, because even if they end up somehow beating... Well, there goes the Mirkwood forces now, they end up routing. But even if they did end up winning that fight against the pikes, disorganised as they were, they of course would have ended up being charged by the Imladris Cav as well. But look at that charge, that was an effective one. They managed to find a gap, the pikes were not ready. They were too focused on chasing down the routing Mirkwood forces. And that could be that. Like, the pikes at this point are very, very depleted. Is there still an archer somewhere? There is. There's one rider of the Bruinen. Right, well, I think it's about time we moved up to time 6 speed, because I think this battle is just going to come down to that one archer trying to kill off the remaining 4 Linden pikes. With 3,000 frames left, another charge. I mean, it's a very close battle, don't get me wrong. Over go the 4 Linden pikes trying to chase off the riders of the Bruinen. I mean, if they charge in with all their cavalry at this point in Imladris, they probably will end up losing. Look how close this battle is. There goes the rider of the Bruinen. Killed off by that one pikeman. Have Imladris accepted their fate? They probably shouldn't. Well, I mean, at this point, it's just one Gwythi Rockdor against 5 4 Linden pikemen. I mean, if it were anything other than pikes, that one knight would probably be sufficient to win this battle. But I think Imladris just needs to bite the bullet and charge headlong into the pikes, accept his fate. Why is he running all the way over there? Like, come on, man. Have some dignity. You've got to charge at this point. He charges into the one that was separated from the rest, which of course is the right thing to do, but I mean, trying to give the 4 Linden pikes the runaround is not really going to work. I don't really know what he hopes to accomplish here. Like, he's never going to be able to outmaneuver the pikes at this point. Although he did, I'm not really sure what Linden were doing there. They just allowed the Elven Knight to charge into the back of them. What on earth was Hazrama thinking there? I think that's cost him the game. That has cost him the game, I think. Indeed it has. Unbelievable. How can you lose to cavalry with pikes? Oh dear. Well, I mean, credit to Imladris for being able to pull that one out of the bag. Of course, they were helped a lot in the early game by how terrible Dorwinion were. And again, I can't imagine that was an intention. Well, I can't imagine that was how Beshi would normally play. I think he threw in the towel after he rather foolishly ran his own knights through his own stakes. As for the other two, I mean, you know, Linden and Mirkwood, I think they realised that, which is why the battle turned into a bit of a Mexican standoff there in the middle. What a weird battle, like what a strange free-for-all. Credit to Imladris for winning the fight. I think ultimately they probably deserved to win based, like, I don't know how Linden managed to lose that. How on earth? Pikes against cavalry and they lost? That's very strange. Very strange indeed. Let's see what did the damage from Imladris. Unsurprising, yeah, I mean, Eldarenway Swordmasters, Gwythi Rockdor, Swordmasters did very well against both Dorwinion and Mirkwood, I must say. A very small army for Imladris. This is probably the only time you'll see Imladris go for such a small amount of infantry. They went for mostly archers and cavalry here, and it paid off because of how the battle went. So big credit, I think, to Eilamael for actually managing to pull this battle out. But I mean, he was helped. I mean, Captain Gervais didn't do an awful lot wrong, I have to say. You know, the hand that fate dealt him in this battle was kind of harsh. But as for Dorwinion, obviously terrible play. And Linden, they threw it away in the end there. Like, Linden should have been the winner of this battle, but they managed to find a way to lose against cavalry when your army's made up mostly of pikes. Very weird. Very, very weird indeed. But it does go to show that you can charge into pikes with cavalry, and provided the charge connects and provided that the pikes don't manage to counter-attack, it can still be effective, but only if the player who's controlling the pikes falls asleep. And that is what happened here. So yeah, big credit to Eilamael. Obviously, you know, I find it a little bit difficult, honestly, to get excited about a battle that's on the grassy plain, because I find the map itself to be so mind-numbingly boring. If anything, I would like to see some free-for-alls that are on slightly more interesting maps. Like, whenever I get a free-for-all, it always tends to be on the grassy plain, and I'm not sure why. Like, there's such potential for free-for-alls on maps that are not the grassy plain. Like, the grassy plain is just, it's so dull, isn't it? It's so boring. The battle itself was obviously a very good one in this case, and that does make up for the fact that the locale is probably the least interesting that they could have picked. But yeah, hopefully this is the last time that I see the grassy plain in a battle ever. Really, the reason that I picked this battle was just because I have a very limited amount of time to record today, and I wanted to get at least something done. And of course, free-for-alls are a little bit more rare in terms of when we see them, and also the fact that we did get to see Imladris in action. We got to see Imladris in a rather unorthodox way be a very dominant force on the battlefield today, so hopefully that makes some people happy. But yeah, big thanks to Eilamael and all the players that played in this particular battle today. The next battle that I do, it'll be business as usual with regards to some of the really long sieges that I've been sent recently, and we will finally get around to that new updated version of Buer Sagat that Eclipse 2500 sent me, which was sort of a pseudo scenario, as it were, because custom scenarios at the moment can't be made because of how they're broken. The hotfix really can't come soon enough, because we really need those other settlements back. You know, I really want to be able to actually play and record on Minas Ithil. I really want to be able to do Dol Amroth again, and also just all of the settlements that are part of that pack. They need to come back into the game, because, you know, it's such a big thing to be missing, and it's such a shame that we can't play on those maps. And hopefully we can get those back as soon as possible. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.